There's a stereotype that accounting is repetitive or boring. What's something about the profession that people would be surprised to learn is actually exciting or dynamic? Mr. Ben Collado is a fund accountant who is here to share his journey, passion, and purpose behind pursuing a career in accounting and the road toward becoming a CPA. In this conversation, we break down what accountants actually do, the many career paths within accounting, what aspiring professionals should know about entering the field, and how technology and AI are shaping the future of the profession.
There are some aspects that come over and over. You are going to produce financial statements every 3 months, and that element comes and goes. It's like clockwork, rinse and repeat. What's interesting is what's happening within the confines of that.
Welcome to the Refined Brew Collective. I'm your host, Ashley. This is a safe space for real conversations, thoughtful reflection, and intentional growth. So grab your coffee and let's sip, reflect, and rise together. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Refined Brew Collective. I'm your host, Ashley, and today's guest is someone who is passionate about ensuring financial information is accurate and that organizations remain compliant with the appropriate financial and regulatory standards. Welcome, Ben Collado.
Pleasure, Ashley. Thank you for inviting me to the podcast.
Thank you for joining us. Ben is a talented and respected fund accountant and aspiring CPA candidate, currently pursuing his CPA certification. From understanding balance sheets and profit and loss statements to ensuring compliance with accounting standards such as GAAP and IFRS, his work focuses on maintaining the integrity and accuracy of financial data. Ben is also a proud Zicklin School of Business alum, having earned both his bachelor's and master's degrees in accounting from Baruch College. He's a recipient of the Good Shepherd Services and EY Scholarship and continues to explore the many intricacies of fund accounting while also working towards his CPA. Here at the Refined Brew Collective, we like to give our guests their flowers while they are alive and thriving. So everyone, please join me in giving Ben his flowers.
Thank you, Ashley.
So before we dive into your personal journey, I want to set the stage for listeners who may not fully understand what an accountant actually does. An accountant is a professional responsible for recording, organizing, and analyzing financial information. Their duties include preparing financial statements that summarize an organization's financial position, conducting audits to ensure accuracy and compliance with regulations, and providing guidance on tax planning and filing. There are several paths someone can pursue within accounting. These include public accounting, management or private accounting, governmental accounting, and forensic accounting. Many professionals also pursue additional certifications, such as the CPA or CMA, to further expand their expertise. So with that foundation in mind, what made you decide to pursue accounting?
Well, I just want to say again, thanks for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure. It's a broad question that I can answer in so many different ways. I like to start with, I guess, part of my origin story. So part of my origin story is that, I'm a native New Yorker, and here in New York, you might come across a lot of people who are on the corner selling an icy from a cart, right? We call those colloquially in the hood, like, our fellow icy lady or our coquito man, right? And that's actually what my mom did. She ran her micro business as our local icy lady in the Bronx. And what was cool about that is that I was actually doing her bookkeeping and her ledger record keeping when I was a kid. I was counting up her nickels, pennies, dimes, quarters, and I would know how much funding she had at the start of the day, and I would count that against how much she had at the end of the day. And obviously the difference between those two is profit. So that's how I got my intuitive understanding of what business is like. And it made me think like, there's this interesting intersection between math and business, and they're very integral to each other. So I got that insight when I was a kid. So that's one way I answer that. Another way is, something you mentioned actually in my background. A major focal point of why I became an accountant was when I did do that internship and eventually that scholarship and mentee program with Ernst and Young and Good Shepherd Services. It was a great experience. I was around 16, and they bring you out to the EY headquarters in Times Square, and they impress upon you just how interesting I think the accounting profession is. I'm sure we'll get into it, and it's really more dynamic than what it seems. I had a great mentor there, and every now and then we stay in touch, but it was just a great experience to kind of like give me the visual of what it's like to be an accountant. Then eventually I did go to Baruch, and my accounting classes reaffirmed that I really wanted to do this. And I'm one of those people who has had a linear set of what he wants, which is good and bad, right? But I think I've always known that I've wanted to be an accountant. I think later on it became clear to me that I wanted to do it in financial services, because another little fun fact about me is that I'm a big fan of trading card games, especially when I
Mm,
was in high school. So Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic the Gathering, that kind of thing. And what was interesting is I was noticing our hypothesis about in college about inefficient financial markets. I was learning that and in through Yu-Gi-Oh. So I would give you an example. So we would go hang out in hobby shops in the Bronx, and people would have their binders of cards, and they would either buy and sell cards or trade cards at a certain value. And when I would go to hobby shops in Brooklyn, I was noticing that the values were very different. And so I could buy cards in the Bronx or trade for them and sell them or trade for them at a very different value at the hobby shops in Brooklyn. So I was like, wait a second, is this what finance is like? And the answer is yes, right? And
mhm.
that's what we learn about in finance when it comes to inefficient markets or asymmetry of information. So those are the kind of the things that like were like my little fundamental parts of why I think I did accounting, and then also why I minored in finance and economics. So those two come together very closely in my career.
Nice. So, two things that you mentioned that I kind of want to go back to. Experience that you had at E&Y, did that give you that exposure that you wanted or needed to pursue your CPA?
I think through the scholarship and, the mentoring program and everything, I did hear a little bit about the CPA licensing process, but I think
Mhm.
what really inspired me to want to be a CPA specifically was once I was in school, and once I was at Baruch doing my undergrad, and understanding that it's an integral part of your career as an accountant to have your CPA licensing. I mean, there's studies that show that over I think a 35-year career span, you probably earn like $1 million more over your career spans. Just that's just the financial aspect, but there's many other rewarding aspects. But just hearing that offhand, I'm like, oh, okay, well that's really important then.
Yeah.
And then other things like reinforced it as I was in school, like the fact that other people were pursuing it, and EY is one of the big four, and it was sort of like, well, we can get into how my resume looks and everything, but I never ultimately did a formal audit internship through the big four. My career was a little different. I did internal audit instead. But when you are in those audit internships, you learn very quickly, like when you do get hired full time, they expect you to want to get your CPA done. So having that background understanding, I think, freshman year, sophomore year was when I was like, okay, well, not only am I going to become an accountant, but I think I want to get the CPA license as well. And it's been a journey, and I'm almost done with wrapping that up now. But I always knew that I should get that too.
Okay. So, the other thing that I wanted to mention, and then we'll touch on the internal auditing later. I used to actually trade Yu-Gi-Oh cards, but I cannot tell you what the value was. I just had a neighbor when I moved that was like a big fan of Yu-Gi-Oh cards. And so he would just give me a bunch of them, and then I'll just like trade them with him like every other day, not knowing anything about it. It was just for fun. And so it was funny when you mentioned it. I was like, oh my God, it's such a small world.
There's so many friends that I've made through the Yu-Gi-Oh community, and then people that I met at Baruch that I should have met through Yu-Gi-Oh because we were in the same circles, but we ultimately met through
Yeah.
Baruch. So I have a very interesting like intersection of friends. It's like Bronx, Yu-Gi-Oh, Baruch. Like a lot of my friends
Cool.
are from one of those three from like my high school days and my college days. So it's very interesting. You learn a lot.
Is it still popular now, the Yu-Gi-Oh cards, or has it transitioned to something else
I would
that you know?
say it has dwindled in mass popularity, but Pokemon is really like, I don't know if you've seen like, cards are like $50,000. You can like, if you have like
Mm,
one of the vintage editions of certain cards, like, they're very
mhm.
expensive. And who knows, like if you open up your treasure chest of old things, you might have a very expensive Pokemon card you don't even know. But I think Pokemon right now is the one that people are like really big on.
Okay, very interesting. So, if you hadn't pursued accounting, what field would you have gotten into instead?
I think I've asked this to myself a few times. I'm like, "Well, if I was an accountant, what would I be?" I think I'd probably be a teacher or a professor.
Okay.
Probably in math. Probably one or the other. Because I think, and I think some of what that has to do with is my background with when I was in school. I was also in New York going to a commuter school. You have to hustle, right? Sometimes you have to earn a living on the side. So in addition to being a student, I was also working at the Queen's Library
Mhm.
specifically their adult learning center. And at the adult learning centers, you're supporting, new American migrant communities and underprivileged adults with helping them get their GED and helping them to sort of navigate the different channels of goals that they want to achieve. So I was a math teacher at the GED level, so at the Queens Adult Learning Center in Long Island City. And I was also I remember being a very good peer tutor through high school. So I feel like if I wasn't an accountant, there's a good chance I'd probably be a teacher.
Wow, that's another thing that we share because I also said, well, people have mentioned this to me because I always said I love math. And if I wasn't doing like accounting or what I'm doing now, what I'm currently pursuing, like I would be a math professor. So that's so cool. Oh my God.
I mean, honestly, I still think about like, what if I did adjunct, like adjunct professor, and
Yeah.
it is a one time, maybe two times a week thing. Sometimes it's on the weekends. I think about it,
Mhm.
and I'm sure we'll dive into more fund accounting specifically. But I think there's this interesting niche of accounting that I'm in that's actually underexplained and undertaught at the undergraduate level. When I mentioned that I'm a fund accountant, even in networking events, people will mention like, "What's that?" And I'm still kind of surprised by that response, but it encourages me that maybe if I were to become a professor, maybe I come up with a niche textbook or a niche class around fund accounting. It's something I think about. So it's not a dream that I've let go necessarily.
Yeah, it's never too late. That's what I always tell people. It's never too late. That would be pretty cool. So looking back, what has been the most challenging and the most rewarding part of working in accounting?
Challenging, it's no mystery to a lot of us who are in the profession, the hours you put in. That can
Mhm.
be it can be a challenge for especially um a lot of us that occupy different roles in our lives. We could be whether we're parents, we're obviously all, someone's son and daughter, cousin, niece, nephew, aunt, and uncle, right? So I know that sometimes I've had to make certain sacrifices where I've put in, 50-hour weeks, 60-hour weeks, understanding that, you know, I'm building a career and this is like the early stages of it. And this is when you probably put in the most hours. So my connections and my friends who are on the audit side and the big four, they have it worse than me. My busy season might be right now, and I'm doing maybe roughly 50 to 60 hours a week on average. But my counterparts who are in the big four, they do way more. They're not doing nine to five. They're doing like 9 to 9 and sometimes worse. So I would say that that could be a
I've heard.
challenge. Yeah, outside looking in, that could be a challenge
Mhm.
um if you don't necessarily know and have a full appreciation yet of what kind of work you're doing. Because at the same time that you are maybe working more than you might prefer, you're actually doing some really interesting work. And I think that's the rewarding part of that question of like what makes it rewarding. So I always start with explaining it from what auditors do at the big four level because it's very easy to visualize. But if you think about all of our popular public companies, Google, Apple, Microsoft, they all have to release financial statements. It's something you mentioned at the top of this episode. That's what accountants do. They have to review financial data and financial statements for completeness and accuracy. And Apple is such a visible product. Has so many visible products in our lives. They have laptops, computers, phones. The big Oculus thing that some people use. So, and they're constantly innovating. And so it's just cool that auditors play a small part in ensuring, that financial markets and public companies are reporting what they should be reporting. I think that's what makes it rewarding. Again, this is from, my background because I'm also passionate about finance and financial markets. Like knowing that you need someone who's an accountant, you need someone who's an auditor to make sure that these numbers are correct because that's how you're protecting the public, right? The public that invests in these companies need protection. And that's how we do that. So yeah, I would definitely say that the challenging part of this career can be just, the legwork that you put in, the hours that you put in during tax season or just busy season in general. I could probably be working 50 to 60 hours a week on average, but my counterparts in audit or just in big four overall, they probably have it worse. They're not doing 9 to 5. Most of the times they're doing 9 to 9 and even worse. So I think for early accountants who may not have a full appreciation of or just an understanding yet of what kind of work you'll be doing, they may not know how interesting the work is and how rewarding that work can be. Because depending on the client that you're working on, you may very much enjoy what that client does and auditing the underlying financial data of that client. You may still find it interesting. You may actually still very much enjoy it despite how much effort it takes to do it. And I think I always like to bring it back to those, those major tech firms that we interact with every day. Microsoft, Apple, Google, these products surround our lives, on a daily basis. That's the only way we talk to each other right now is through this technology. And these are public companies, and these companies have public investors. I might be one of them. I may not even know, like through my 401k and things like that. So auditors play a very interesting role in protecting those financial markets from fraud or errors or misstatements so that the public can trust this financial data and these financial statements and understand what they're investing into. So that's what I find most rewarding is that I'm sort of playing a behind the scenes role in all of that.
I like that. So, was there ever a moment you considered giving up, and what helped you continue pushing forward?
Yeah, certainly. So I think two main things that I think have been discouraging at times was being from maybe perhaps like a more diverse or minority background in this space. It could be difficult sometimes, not necessarily seeing yourself reflected in the industry as much as you would like. That could be challenging, especially early on because I didn't know how I was going to fit in or, little things bubble up like the imposter syndrome and things like that that people, are aware of, but it can happen to us at our own micro level. So I was having to kind of push through that, I think, through school. And then another thing that made it difficult for me was I took a break from school. I took a break from my undergrad, my academic career to help families. At the time, my family was having difficult times because my mom had experienced a couple strokes and her health was not in a good place. So I took about a year and a half off from school. I started working in office administration here in the city at our local hospital. And it was good. It was good work, but it was sort of like the sacrifice that I needed to make so that I could make sure that my family was where they needed to be. And a year and a half went by, and I went back to school knowing that ultimately, like, I'm not going to let go of this pursuit that I have of becoming an accountant and, establishing my professional career in finance. So, I left that office administration job at around like 2017, and I geared myself up into being back in school by the spring of 2018, which means I graduated during COVID. So I would have been a 2017 grad. Instead, I was about a 2020 grad. And that was its own actually unique challenge in and of itself, COVID. And I can definitely get into that. And then eventually, I still had my challenges of being in school, working that second job at the Queen's Library. And I would often work that Queen's Library job on the weekends, teaching the adult population GED math, and then I would still do an internship. So I would do an internship in accounting. I would work at that library, and I would go to school. So I was just juggling, and I got really good at that juggling. But it takes a while to really gain that skill.
Yeah, that's very admirable. I was going to ask you if you did it full time, but you answered that question. So I think that shapes you overall, like, being able to juggle that many things because it kind of prepares you for life in general.
Uh-huh.
I always think life gets more difficult in some aspects.
Mhm. I'm with you on that. Like, that's why, I just turned 30 this past December. And now I'm at that nice, crisp stage where like the CPA can get my full focus now because I did my undergrad, and I finished that in 2020. And I focused on just the career that I had at Daiwa Capital Markets for 3 years. And then I went back to grad school so that I could have the 150 credit hours in 2023. I finished that in May of 2025, and now is when I finally have cleared the deck, and now I have the time to just focus on, yes, obviously I'm working and I enjoy what I do, and at the same time, now I have that nice little slice of free time where I can finally focus on my CPA work.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it is.
For you. So every career has defining moments that shape the direction we take. Let's talk about some of the experiences that helped shape your path. Could you walk us through what a typical day in the life of a fund accountant looks like?
Yes. And I think now's a great time to maybe add a word or a phrase to that whole type of accounting. I feel like fund accounting is missing a word at the beginning. It should really be
Okay.
investment fund accounting, in my opinion. Because what's happening is when you are involved in doing the accounting for an investment fund, and I like to step back and just give people the context. Imagine a pool of investors coming together to form some kind of private equity or type of private credit strategy in the financial markets. So in my case, I work at a real estate firm that has an ownership side, has an equity side, and it has a private credit side. And so my daily life is on that private credit side for the most part. And so again, this is in a real estate context. So the focus for us is putting out construction loans, essentially financing construction projects throughout the country. So we're very experienced with markets here in New York and in the tri-state area. Imagine a condo that's going up in Brooklyn, or something interesting that's being some kind of mixed use property that's going up in Midtown. Those projects need financing, and these private credit investors come together and pool their funds together to make a fund, and that fund invests in putting out those loans as the asset. So that's what in my day to day, that's what I'm overseeing. I'm helping to monitor the performance of those loans. I'm actually also putting out the construction draws. So when those borrowers knock on our door to get another construction draw, whether they want to borrow $500,000 for the month, or they need to borrow, $1 million to cover their project for the next 2 months, or whatever the case may be. Part of what I'm doing is actually sending them the wire. So they actually, get a wire payment, and they call me and they're like, okay, Ben, here are the new wire instructions for the new project. I want to verbally confirm those instructions with you before you send the money. Because, there's a lot of fraud these days. I can't just trust wire instructions that come over email. I need to call back my borrower and make sure that it's actually them and not a scammer. And then that's on the outgoing side. That's where the money flows to. But in terms of where the money flows from, it goes back to those investors that form the pool that we call an investment fund. So think of it like this. Those investors often are pension funds, endowment funds, sovereign wealth, institutional investors. And then there's also an interesting mix of high net worth investors that are actually very noble jobs, like a very successful dentist who's in his 60s, and maybe he's very well allocated already to the stock market through his 401k, and he's very well allocated to that through his IRA as well, and he wants something more interesting in his mix of investments. And maybe because already now he's an accredited investor, he can go into private equity, and he can do that through his advisor. So now what we're getting as well are these investment advisors who will pull together those high net worth investors and send their funds all in one shot. In terms of the money coming in, what that looks like is, an investor might send me $500,000 for his or her investment, and they'll email me and they'll say, "Hey Ben, can you please confirm receipt of those funds?" And I have to go back and check. At the same time, maybe when they get a distribution, because again, these are real estate investments, so these funds are structured as a REIT. So we have to pay out all the income of the REIT, or at least 90%, because of REIT rules and everything. The regulations say that when you structure an investment as a REIT, you have to send out in distributions at least 90% of the income back to the investor so that they can get the tax benefits of structuring it as a REIT. So every 3 months we do that on a quarterly basis, and an investor might change their wire instructions from A to B. So I'm going back and reconciling my list of all my investor templates to make sure I'm not sending that money to the wrong place when it's time to do quarterly distributions. Another element of my day to day is just troubleshooting little things, troubleshooting where a reconciliation went wrong as we're doing like financial reporting or investment reporting. Maybe an investor got the wrong report. Maybe an investor changed their account number and we have to go back and change it in our system. Little things like that we're fine tuning along the way. So there's the big picture stuff and there's the little things that I'm doing as well. It's very dynamic. So it's hard to kind of put it all into one framework, but it's a lot.
It's really cool though.
Yeah.
Uh, are there any additional responsibilities that accountants handle that people might not really expect?
Yeah. Accountants in a room, they're like the voice of reason. Like I think we have right now our impression of the classic finance bro in social media and in the culture, right? Somebody who's
Mhm.
very intentional about trying to be a hustler and work hard and, try to buff up the profit and loss statement of their company, right? But the accountant is somebody who's like the steward of capital. So like the person who's on the finance side, who's putting out those, back to my, example of my day to day, the person who's underwriting the loans, they're so focused on, let's put that money out and let's make sure that we, earn interest on this new loan and things like that. But the accountant is in the room is often somebody who says, okay, wait, what about the risks involved with that investment? And risk management. Accountants are not very risk adverse in a bad way, but they're conscious of risk is what I want to say. They're very conscious of risk, and oftentimes your CFO is somebody who is constantly looking over the horizon and noticing the new risks of your organization as it gets bigger, as it gets smaller, as it gets more attention over time.
It's interesting. Do you work closely with the CFO?
But yeah, absolutely. He's our leader in the accounting department, and he's sort of I learn something new every day. I'm really impressed with the people I work with. Like when like you watch The Matrix and you're like, oh wow, there's levels to this, right? And Neo is learning from Morpheus, and you're like, oh wow, Morpheus is like special.
Mhm.
Neo is special too, obviously, but when he's still an amateur coming out of the old world, he doesn't know what he's doing. It's sort of like that. You're like in awe of this mentor who like shows you new things, and I think that's another cool thing about accounting overall. Like the professionals who are in this space are so smart, and you're learning a lot. Nothing but kudos to who I work with. I think everywhere you work, it's people oriented, right? You work for companies, but you also work for people too, and you should also be mindful of that in your career, like who you're working with, who you work for. I can't say enough about that. It's really important.
Yeah, I agree. Leadership plays a key role in wanting to continue whatever it is that you're doing, or at least fueling that passion, you know?
Because it'll either fuel you or, if leadership is weak, that might lead to burnout and other issues. So it's actually really important to be mindful of that.
So early in your career, you had internship exposure to real estate and investment related work. Would you say that experience influenced the direction your career ultimately took?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I had three main internships that I would consider like accounting or finance internships. So working enough at Queen's Library as a teacher, GD math teacher, I got the opportunity to work on the corporate accounting side. So they invited me over to, just through networking and being a little fortunate, they invited me to do a little bit of corporate accounting at the headquarters in Jamaica, Queens. So I would travel, mind you, like I said, I'm from the Bronx, so this was quite a commute, but I would travel all the way there. The Queens Library headquarters is pretty cool, actually. They have the best arrangement of books, the best arrangement of different things that the patrons can do there. So it was nice to see that. And then I would come in and I would do things like payroll reconciliation, accounts payable, accounts receivable. So that was like my first little taste of accounting. And then I did something very similar at a firm called Magnum Real Estate Group. So I did that. And again, another opportunity to see like operational accounting, very functional ins and outs, accounts payable, accounts receivable. And then ultimately, I think the internship that really put things over the edge for me was my time at Daiwa Capital Markets. So I was working in the internal audit department there. A little bit about Daiwa. Daiwa is a broker dealer. I would consider them like a mid-sized broker dealer. They're a Japanese firm, so they compete with larger investment banks in Japan, like Nomura, Mizuho, firms like that. So they're not quite that size, but they compete with them. And I think that's what put it over the edge for me, that I knew that this is what I wanted to do. That internship, I did that from 2019 all the way through the beginning of COVID and the end of my undergraduate. And then when I finished that in 2020, they brought me on board. They hired me full time, and so I want to say that that was in October of 2020 or September of 2020 when I was brought on, because unfortunately interns got furloughed at the time. So from when I graduated ish to when I was brought on, 4 months, I was just hanging out at home. And then they were like, "Don't worry, Ben, that we'll bring you back." And so I was brought back and I was hired full time. And from there on is when I would say my full time career started. It's October of 2020 to 2023 is when I did my 3 years of my tour of duty as an internal auditor. But yeah, in terms of like those experiences that brought me onto this, I would say those were the main three: the corporate accounting at Queen's Library, that opportunity at Magnum Real Estate Group, and then internal audit.
You know what's interesting? For internal auditing, I considered pursuing that direction, but I was always told that you couldn't necessarily do that unless you had your CPA. At least like, back in my day, which is not too far. But yeah, so I just didn't really look into it that much because I always thought, okay, I need to get my CPA in order to pursue this. But now apparently like people such as yourself and others have like been able to continue to do auditing without having a CPA. It's encouraged. And then there's also the internal auditing certificate, I believe. I'm not entirely
Yeah,
sure.
I want to say that's the CIA. I want to
Yeah.
let me double check myself on that. I think it's
Okay.
certified internal auditor. Yes, the CIA certification. That's right. So that is out
Mm.
there. I ultimately didn't get it, but it did come up in conversation. Like, Ben, are you interested? So what I want to say actually, to your point, there is a an aspect of the accounting career that still plays out very conventionally. It's a little bit formulaic in my opinion, and that's something that I think we can work on in the industry. And it often looks like this, somebody joins the big four or they join a mid-size accounting firm. They do auditing or tax for 3 to 5 years, or they ultimately stay at that firm or other accounting firms and they go up and they become, tax managers, audit managers, and maybe they become partners at their respective accounting firms. Or what I was going to say, the former happens, they work 3 to 5 years and they go into industry. Oftentimes they'll go into the space that their clients were in. So if you're a auditor and you specialize in financial services clients, eventually you probably will find yourself in industry at a financial services firm. And there's nothing wrong with that, but at the same time, that trajectory for me wasn't going to be the case because again, I had taken 2 years off from school, and so because of how unconventional and untraditional of a student I had become, it just wasn't fitting in with what those big four internships look like. Often they'll say by then they want to see you with audit background. They want to see you with probably an internship already. And sometimes by junior year, they're already giving you a full-time offer after your junior year internship, whether that's in the summer or in the winter. And then the only way you get that internship is if you had gotten that a year before. Like me taking the 2 years off that I took, it wasn't fitting in to what they were looking for. But what I'm fortunate about, what I'm very glad about in my own personal story is how I was able to navigate around that. For a little while, I thought I was missing out. I was like, oh no, like, I never worked in Big Four. I never worked at an accounting firm. Am I missing out? And now I work with them every day. Now I'm on the other side of that. They come and they ask me questions and they have inquiries and they reach out when they audit our financial statements. And now I know what they do from the client perspective, from the buy side in a way. And it helps me to understand, like, I didn't miss out. I still gained experience working with auditors, even though I only did internal audit at the same time. So I think that's a reflection of how dynamic the career trajectory is becoming too. Because like you said, I think for a long time, yeah, whether it's internal audit or just audit, people think, you have to become a CPA. And at the time I had not done it yet. So I think it serves as an example of like, you can be who you are and you don't necessarily have to have everything lined up for you to get an opportunity these days.
Yeah, I agree. And I think connections also play as well because I've known people that have said that they don't necessarily have the background that EY or the other big four would expect, and then connections through networking, which is really important. They were able to land a position.
Yeah, and I feel like we in a lot of ways it's easy to feel like FOMO. It is easy to feel a little insecure when you don't have the staple. I think the career staple in accounting is like, did you do Big Four or did you do midsize? And so it was really nice to be able to shed that off now that I am where I am, and I don't have it, but I don't feel like I'm missing out at all.
That's really good. So, when companies introduce new financial systems or tools, accountants are often heavily involved in implementation and documentation. What are some of the biggest challenges you've seen when organizations transition to new systems?
So there's been two key examples of counting systems that I've had to implement at work. Once at a previous job before my time at S3 Capital, and now once again here at S3. And they actually played out very differently. They're almost standalone as interesting case studies. So at one point, I was implementing a system called Dynamo Accounting at my previous job, and the books and records that we had in place in the Dynamo system were pretty behind. So I got my first fund accounting role. I got that in 2023 as I was going back into grad school at a firm called Banner Ridge. And so we were implementing Dynamo accounting there, and the books had been behind maybe like 2, 3 years. So I had to dig back to the debits and credits and all the financials from 3 to 4 years ago. And then I had to catch that up for all the different entities and funds that exist across the platform at the firm. And I had to keep catching them up quarter by quarter by quarter. And that's not my day job. That's just like, that was an overall process improvement project for that one system. So I had to navigate doing that keeping that up to speed. And it was a very visible project. You know, the partners of the firm had invested a good amount of money into this new accounting system. And so like it almost felt like, not on purpose, but it almost felt like this little pressure campaign of like, oh Ben, how's Dynamo going? And I'm like, sometimes it was like that, but at other times it was really good progress. I would say with any new accounting implementation, just know that you have to be able to multitask your day-to-day accounting work and then the project of implementing that system. And they're not the same thing. They're almost two different jobs altogether. But the great thing is once that system is implemented, it should make your day job much easier. The other case study that almost feels like a case study is my time now implementing a system called Kyriba. And this one's going very differently. We might actually probably drop our relationship with Kyriba. And that's also not necessarily a bad thing either. You know, when you're implementing an accounting system or any ERP system, it's much better to know early on that it's not a good fit as you're implementing it than figuring it out years later after you've invested so much time and effort and resources and putting all the financial data in for you to realize, okay, it's not a good fit. So, I don't speak for my company. We're not sure if we're going to necessarily keep it or not, but it's an interesting case study of like some accounting systems might be a good fit, some not. The earlier you recognize that, the better. And for me, I think the input that I had was that I was bringing up to my manager little by little, like, are you sure? Because, this thing has this little flaw and it has that little flaw. And I think I was being a little pesky, but that was the point. I wanted to kind of bring up these flaws. And I think over time, those added up and he incorporated that feedback into his own assessment of the system. And independent of me, we're deciding maybe it's not the best fit for us. So if there's any lesson there, it's like, don't be shy in telling your manager, like, yeah, we're implementing this new thing and it's cool, but it's got some issues. Because the quicker you do that, the quicker you can decide whether or not to keep it. And the better it is for you, because then you're not burnt out trying to implement the system that's probably, not going to last.
I agree. When it comes to the seasonal audits that you have to do and you're implementing these new systems, are you in charge of documenting the processes and also ensuring that the auditors understand like the new system as well and making sure that it's being accurately reported?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I think there's two layers to that. After you've implemented a new accounting system, you now have to go around to everybody and broadcast to them a couple things. You have to broadcast to them how to use it. You have to broadcast to them how to follow the rules around it. And then you also probably have to keep nudging them to use it. And that third one is really important because it comes down to change management. Like we have our habits, right? And we have our workflows that are already pre-established. And if you don't keep nudging people to change their workflow, they're never going to implement that system into their day to day. And then that's another way that investment into that system can go to waste potentially because people aren't implementing that new website or that new portal or that new system into their day to day. So nudging people like, hey, you asked me for this report, but you can go back to Kyriba and pull it. You don't have to ask me anymore. Not in a confrontational way, but just, in a
Mhm.
polite way of like, now you can pull that in an automated way. And so you just keep nudging people like, this is how you use it. Here are the rules around it. And just, again, nudging people to use it is really important.
Cool. So there's stereotype that accounting is repetitive or boring. What's something about the profession that people would be surprised to learn is actually exciting or dynamic?
I hear you on the impression because there are some aspects that come over and over. Like you are going to produce financial statements every 3 months. I think that element, it comes and goes. It's like clockwork, rinse and repeat. What's interesting is what's happening within the confines of that. So for me, once you've prepared a balance sheet, if the business you're working with and that you're working for is growing a lot, that balance sheet is probably going to change significantly from one quarter to the next. One day we could have 10 loans on our balance sheet. The next day, or not maybe the next day, but 3 months later, we could have 15, we could have 20. And along the way, I've been recording the principal of those loans. I've been recording the interest income of those loans. I've been sending the construction draws of those loans to the people who need them. And along the way, they send us pictures of the progress of these construction projects. And I'm like, oh wow, like, that $1 million that I sent went into all the labor and all the materials that's making this building so beautiful. So when they send the next progress picture and they send all the little updates of this project, yes, it's an asset on our balance sheet, but also it's like, wow, like we put money out in the world and it became that, and that's cool. Like I find that dynamic. And I guess that's unique to real estate, but it's not unique to the industry. Like you're going to be working in places where, especially if you're in financial services, where you're investing into something that, yes, it's producing a return for investors, but the only reason why is because you're probably doing something significant in the world. So I think that's really cool too. Like I would only imagine how cool it would be to work at a private equity firm that specializes in technology companies, and they, lo and behold, you invested in OpenAI, and now you didn't know that that's what it was going to become, but now it's blown up, and we use ChatGPT every day. But I can only imagine how cool and dynamic that would be. Like, wow, this investment became so valuable because look at how valuable it's become to the world. You know?
I agree. Technology is changing nearly every industry, and accounting is no exception. Let's talk a little bit about how the profession is evolving. How have you personally seen AI or automation impact the work accountants do today?
I would say we're still very much in the early innings of the impact. Um, I do find myself using AI on a day-to-day basis, but I would say that the tasks are often, I would think, mundane, kind of like little ways to speed up the work that I would have already done. I'll give you an example. Like if I have to put together an email that covers the like five different little aspects that I want to have in it, and I want to refine what those bullets look like, I might take my draft and put that into an AI platform, and then it'll probably refine it. It'll help me with the syntax, it'll help me with the grammar, it'll help me with translating that back into a business language version of what I want that email to sound like. So I think with linguistics, I think AI is pretty good with that. Same thing with what I'm seeing on the finance side. So I'm on the accounting side, but on the finance side, a lot of my coworkers may be using AI to make their financial reporting, or investor reporting rather, pristine. So they might write up an underwriting memo of a new construction project that we might or may not invest in. But they make that memo cleaner and they make it more informative through maybe AI. So they've already written up a draft and they've done their underwriting, but then they might run that through an AI platform, and then it comes back even more refined. Those are good use cases, but I still feel like that's still early innings because I feel like a lot of us are using it in that way. What would be really interesting is the ways in which it may do other things for me. Like it may be able to reconcile a report and find out why am I off by this much, and just putting it in, taking an Excel sheet and putting that in and letting it try that. In some instances it might be there, but I think it's kind of few and far apart that it's really where we would want it to be as accountants. In terms of automation, I think automation is in a similar place, but I think much more further along. So, I've talked about my example of implementing those two different systems. It's interesting because those are good examples of maybe standardizing, but they're not always examples of automating, because a lot of firms still use QuickBooks, very, very casual accounting software. And you might improve your accounting software from QuickBooks to something new, but did you automate it or did you just change platforms? You get what I'm saying? So
Mhm.
I think the automation is still left a little bit to be desired, I think. Same thing with AI.
So you don't feel like it could be a potential threat to like accountants in the future.
I would just say the cliche thing of like, there's going to be accountants that don't know how to use AI, and there's going to be accountants that do know how to use AI, and
Hmm.
you probably want to be in that second group.
Yeah.
But accountants in general are not going anywhere. Look at every aspect of our lives. You need an accountant to run that business or to help you understand your own business, because as we know, accounting is the language of business. And so we, even when with our own taxes, you need to stop by H&R Block, right? So in every little facet of our lives, we have accountants involved. I don't see that changing.
For students or aspiring accountants entering the field today, what foundational skills should they focus on developing?
Okay, one that really comes to mind is intellectual curiosity is really important. Being open-minded and asking questions in your early experiences that enable you to understand the structures underneath what's being asked of you, and what kind of work you're doing right now. So you might be working on something, and yes, you could do it on autopilot and you could return it back to your manager and the assignment could be good. But what would be even better for you is if you ask a lot of critical questions around that because that's when you have all the time to learn through your internships, through your early experiences, and not feel awkward and not feel like, oh, you should know this by now, that kind of thing. And the more of those you get out, the more you'll get back because then you'll understand the underlying superstructures of that business or the accounting for that business or the accounting of that industry. All those things are things that you could pick up on. But if you just kind of do your work and don't push it past that, you're going to miss out, I feel.
And you also get lost, as an example, I would think if your manager were to come up to you and be like, "Hey, why does this look like this?" And you thought it was right, but it's like a certain expense that was supposed to
Mhm.
be a certain amount, and you're just like, well, this is supposed to be equal this number, or this is supposed to be a little bit more than this." But they're just like, "Well, explain to me in the way that you're explaining to a financial stakeholder." You're just like, "Oh, "I don't know."
Yeah,
So yeah, I do agree with what you're saying. Like you should know the underlying foundation to what you're doing. Very
it's
important.
very much the case for me right now because on a day to day, I will bring in wire sheet to the founders of the company. Something I find really interesting about them is they're so meticulous about the business. They like to see every wire payment that's going out of the firm. It could be 50, it could be 100, it could be 500, but they like to see every single one. And they'll sign on the dotted line next to every wire, acknowledging that they have seen all the money that's going out of the firm every day. So as I stop by their office and bring those wire sheets to them, yes, I know the amount that I put into the bank. Yes, I put in the right beneficiary, but do I know what it's for? Do I know what this outflow is for and how is it impacting us? Is it growing our balance sheet? Is that an expense? Things like that. If we don't know that, yes, the founders can ask the person who asked me to make the payment, but then, I'm not an effective messenger at that point. So I come into those moments knowing exactly what these payments are all about, and they can ask me about it. They can inquire with me, and they can feel confident that I know why I'm sending out this money.
Very nice. In today's competitive job market, what are some ways young professionals can stand out when applying for roles?
I want to answer, but I also want to acknowledge as well just how my understanding of how difficult the job market is right now. So I have a lot of empathy for, our counterparts who are going through that and they're in their early stages of their careers and they're trying to figure themselves out. The job market is very competitive right now. And I think like we've been seeing in different, news media and, articles coming out from the Wall Street Journal and things like that, that that low rung first job, like, um, entry level position is sort of starting to disappear. It's starting to disappear more and more often because of things like AI and automation. Or if it's not disappearing, sometimes it's being offered at a smaller extent. So there's more people competing for the same number of jobs. So definitely have to put that out there that it's not easy. At the same time, what I would recommend I definitely would say building your intangibles, making sure that you're coming into the workplace once you do have that interview or when you do have that internship. Obviously, don't fumble it. Make sure that you're giving it your full effort. That's part of, I would say, the work ethic that you should carry yourself with at all times. That's one intangible. That intellectual curiosity that I mentioned before is another. And even demonstrating that in your interview is important too. Like sometimes we forget a very important phrase in the interviewing process, which is show, not tell. So sometimes you can show your skills instead of talking about them, you can show them. And that's an important thing too, demonstrating what you're going to bring as opposed to saying what you're going to bring. We can dive into that and you can get very specific about that, but I would keep it at that level of like making sure that you show, not tell, that you're intellectually curious in your opportunities, that you deliver that work ethic and find out if the industry you're doing accounting for is the right industry for you because you can do accounting for anything. You could work for a makeup brand, you could work as an accountant for a clothing brand or for a very large conglomerate of soda companies, you can do accounting for anything. So for me, I just knew that accounting in financial services was my thing. Going back to my little Yu-Gi-Oh days, like I figured out like this finance thing is really interesting. This whole stock market thing, investments, like that just really resonated with me. But, maybe a big factor of that is I grew up in New York City where this is the financial capital of the world. Like maybe that's a big factor. Maybe had I grown up in Detroit, maybe I'd be doing accounting for car companies. Maybe I'd be working at Ford or something. So another thing is use the environment around you and double down on that to your advantage because you don't want to miss out on what's happening in your market. If there's a lot of technology companies around, apply to that accounting internship at Netflix. Maybe you'll learn a lot and you'll like accounting for a media company and so on and so on. So I think those are like my major takeaways for anybody who's early.
Okay. So, another important milestone for many accounting professionals is pursuing the CPA certification. And I know this is something that you're currently working towards. What led you to pursue the CPA? And what opportunities do you hope it will open up for you in the future?
I want to get this done because it proves back to me for my own sake that I can get hard things done. I really like that. Little ways that I could show myself that I can do hard things. I've also
Mhm.
been, this is a complete tangent, but I've been running longer and longer distances, and that's another example of like I can do hard things. You know, I like being able to like introduce that to myself. So that's kind of what keeps me going and fuels me today.
What opportunities do you hope it will open up for you in the future?
Mm. So it is very common. There's a very common understanding out there that with a CPA, you can start to become an executive or maybe a leader at an organization. And not to say that you can't, but if you have that in your favor, then why not? So I think that's important for me and anyone else who is in this career. Like it is a very clear positive when it's time for a promotion or when it's time to be considered in a new way, or when it's time for you to graduate from your current position and look for other roles outside of your organization. Having that licensing done shows the job market that you're very serious about this career, that you're on it, you're on top of it. And, CPAs can do anything. CPAs become CFOs, yeah, but they often become also CEOs and they become chief operating officers as well. So, there's CPAs all over the C-suite. I don't think that it's just, linear, right? CPAs don't just get tracked into CFO. They can be other things too in an organization. So I think once you have it done, it's just so interesting how the world just kind of opens up and you can do all kinds of things.
Do you have an idea as to what direction you want to go into after you've obtained it?
This reminds me of like the classic like what do I want to be when I grow up type thing. And I have like different sample career paths, but I'm not like wedded to any of them necessarily. I like where I'm at right now.
Mhm.
And I don't know, everyone has like their big dream and they have like maybe like a corresponding little dream or whatever. So I would say like, yeah, it would be really cool to become like a trusted leader at an organization, whether it's in finance, whether it's in accounting. I think I'm still open to that. And that's a
Mhm.
process, that none of that happens overnight, I think you have to like establish trust with the people around you. And it's so important, like also whether or not you have an advocate within your organization who's sort of like pulling for you and speaking well to your accomplishments behind the scenes. So I don't really put pressure on myself around like whether that's happening or who's doing this or who's doing that for me. I think those things are happening, and but I don't necessarily keep tabs on it because I think another thing too is if you're too intentional about that at work, people notice like, okay, this person's very like keen on advancing their career, and I think some people, it rubs people the wrong way. So I
Mhm.
think I try to be present with the role that I have, knowing that, maybe 3 to 5 years down the road, maybe that becomes a conversation of what can I do next. And I think right now what's interesting about my current role is that it's very hybrid. It has a lot of fund accounting elements and it has a lot of financial operations elements to it. So that's why I say like there's different career paths that I could go down, but some kind of managerial capacity would be I think in the works in the future. And it just depends on what's out there. Whether like I don't even know how big my organization is going to get. I think right now we're at maybe $4 to $5 billion of assets under management. 3 to 5 years from now, I don't know how big we're going to be. And I don't know how important I'm going to become so that, we could be as big as we are going to be. So I'm still open minded to what life has in store.
Would one of those paths be to open a business?
That's very tempting. Entrepreneurship is very like I think entrepreneurship is tricky because I think the longer you wait to start, I think the harder it is. I have devoted a long time to my academic career. Like, I took a pause from school. So ultimately, my undergrad took maybe 5-ish, 6-ish years, if you add up all the semesters, when it probably could have taken 4 if I hadn't taken some time off. And then I spent 2 years getting my graduate degree. So had I not been doing that, maybe I could have been doing entrepreneurship. In one way or another. But yeah, I think it's possible. Maybe another potential career path for accountants that are in finance is becoming your own investment advisor. That's a very popular route. I'm not saying that that's something that I would do, but I think about it sometimes, and that's its own little form of entrepreneurship. But you have to have your own book of clients, and you have to have your name out there in the industry. You have to have your own little deal pipeline. So that's one thing that I've potentially considered, and maybe a little mom and pop, bookkeeping company, accounting at that level for small businesses is another thing that crosses my mind from time to time. But I haven't necessarily put myself out there. So yeah, little things like that come to mind.
Nice. So I wanted to touch back on what we were discussing before we started recording, which was the CPA and how it's always rapidly evolving. When I was considering taking the CPA a few years ago, four parts were required, but you mentioned that it's three parts. So I kind of wanted to touch on that to see if you can explain that a little bit more for people.
Yeah, that's right. There's now there was a recent 2023, 2024 change, I want to say, where it's three mandatory parts and one optional part. But optional in the sense that you get a chance to decide what that fourth test is going to be across three different subjects. So the first three mandatory ones have um, largely stayed the same, but that fourth one has the remnants of what the old one used to be and a little bit of the others. And so I would definitely encourage CPA candidates to look into which of those three optional exams would be best for them based on their specialty or what they want their specialty to become in the future, because you can now, with that exam, you can highlight your strengths. Instead of viewing the exam as a barrier, now you can use it as a competitive edge. So you can choose the exam that reflects what you want your specialty to be. Acing that exam would be great, I think, for anyone who wants that to be their main focus. I would definitely like compare the three, and whatever you think your specialty is likely going to be once you're established, try to take that one and get an understanding of the exam. Maybe if you don't like that subject, maybe you switch it. But again, I would definitely try to emphasize that specialty later on in your interview stages. I think that would be very beneficial.
What resources have been helpful for you in preparing for the exam?
My alumni network. I actually want to tell you a funny story. I won my CPA Becker study guide for free in a raffle,
Ooh,
all because I stayed in touch with my Baruch community and kept going to alumni events. I walked into this big Baruch alumni event. There was maybe like 200 students there, or 200 alumni, and maybe students as well. And there was many booths, and one of the booths was a Becker CPA booth. And I stopped by and I spoke to the gentleman who was running the booth, and he said, "Yeah, we're giving out the study guide for free in this raffle." And I thought, let me glance at the Excel sheet where he has all the names. And you would have thought that out of the 200 people that were there, maybe you would have 100 names, maybe 150 names. There was 8 names on the spreadsheet
wow.
out of almost 200 people that were there. So best believe I was putting my name down because that my odds were pretty good. And so yeah, I won the raffle, but that's because I put my name down. People didn't even put their name down. So it kind of made me think different. That experience in and of itself, yes, it saved me a pretty penny because the study guide is expensive. The Becker
Hmm.
CPA study guide is literally like I think $3,000 or something like that, and the license only lasts you for 2 years, so it's not even indefinite. So that is a cost. It is a barrier to entry. So that's one lesson, right? But another lesson from that was like, and what made it so funny is like in a room of 200 people, only 10 people put their name down. So I think the takeaway is like put yourself out there because you never know what is in store for you if unless you put your foot out there and you really give it a try, right?
So would you say that's something that listeners could take away from this conversation?
Absolutely, yeah. Stay in touch with your alumni network, stay in touch with your industry networks, and see what little freebies are out there because you never know. And what's interesting is maybe my firm would have reimbursed me for the CPA study guide, but now I
Hmm.
don't have to negotiate that. Now I don't have to haggle that. Now I have it and it's go, go, go. And now I also, funny enough, I don't have any excuses, right? Now I have the guide for free. Now I have the time and I graduated from school. So what am I doing? I'm studying because it was literally given to me. So yeah, that too. Take advantage of what's being offered to you and don't let opportunities just slip you by.
Agreed. So before we wrap up, we ask every guest here at the Refined Brew Collective, what does living a refined life mean to you right now?
I think a refined life is one that is very intentional. A life where, yeah, you may be a working professional, you may be someone who's career oriented, and that's good. That's great. But also make sure you have an appropriate work life balance. Because I think people think they expect their jobs and careers to give them the work life balance, but really we have to pursue that independently. And that has to come from within, like intrinsically. And so you can't really expect that from your job. At the same time that I work 50 to 60 hours a week, Like I said, I've been running a lot. It's my main hobby right now, and I still somehow found time to run 5 days a week. What do? I run in the basement. There's a gym in the basement, and there's 40 people at the firm, and they give out 12 passes. And most people don't even use the gym pass, but I use it. So it's a little way to kind of sneak away into creating that work-life balance that I want to see in my life. I spend a lot of time with my loved ones on the weekends when I can, and when I can't because they know I'm studying or I'm in the middle of things, they respect that. Right now, I'm living at home and I have my 1-year-old niece that I hang out with, and I would love to hang out with her more, but like I said, I'm a busy accountant, but on the weekends, I try to devote some time to that. So I think living a refined life is like that, trying to be intentional and be present wherever you are when you're there. Yeah, that's what being refined right now means to me.
Really beautiful. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining me on this episode of the Refined Brew Collective. If you'd like to learn more about Ben, you can find him on LinkedIn. His information will be linked in the show notes. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Refined Brew Collective.
Thanks, Ashley. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for sharing this moment with me on the Refined Brew Collective. If today's conversation poured into you, take a moment to reflect and pass it along to someone who needs it. Until next time, sip slowly, reflect deeply, and rise intentionally.